Bob Mitchell's excavator bucket froze mid-swing, the 67-year-old farmer's weathered hands gripping the controls as his eyes locked onto something that shouldn't exist in his irrigation ditch. It wasn't debris from the storm. It was a skeleton wrapped in matted fur, barely breathing. The German shepherd's amber eyes flickered open, meeting his gaze with a desperate intelligence that made Bob's chest tighten. Her ribs jutted through scarred hide like broken fence posts, and dark stains around her muzzle told a story no farm dog should know. Martha's voice echoed in his memory. "Animals know when they're dying, Bobby. They find someone they trust." 3 years since cancer took his wife, and he still heard her wisdom in moments like this. "Jesus Christ," Bob whispered, shutting off the engine. The silence that followed felt heavy with judgment. How long had she been down there? How many times had he driven past this spot, focused on his own grief while something precious suffered just yards away? Time was running out for both of them. Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching. From now, let's continue with the story. Bob Mitchell hadn't planned on becoming a man who talked to empty rooms, but grief had its own timeline. At 67, the retired construction foreman found himself addressing Martha's photograph each morning over coffee that had grown cold while he stared at bills he couldn't pay. The kitchen table, once alive with her laughter and the rustle of newspaper pages, now served as a monument to medical debt. $47,000 in reminders that love couldn't cure cancer. The 40-acre farm outside Austin stretched like a faded promise around their modest ranch house. Weathered fence posts marked boundaries that felt more like prison walls these days. Social Security barely covered groceries, and the pension from Mitchell Construction had evaporated when the company filed bankruptcy 3 years ago. The bank's foreclosure notice sat hidden beneath a stack of Martha's gardening magazines that Bob couldn't bring himself to throw away. "Back in my day, a man's word meant something," he muttered, repeating the phrase that had become his shield against a world that no longer made sense. But words couldn't resurrect his purpose or fill the hollow ache that had settled into his bones since losing Charlie 6 months ago. The German shepherd's battle with cancer had been swift and expensive, a preview of the helplessness Bob would feel watching Martha follow the same path. Charlie's empty kennel still sat beside the barn, its chain coiled like a question mark Bob refused to answer. Dr. Hayes had been gentle when delivering the diagnosis, but gentleness didn't soften the choice between expensive treatment and letting a beloved companion slip away. Bob had chosen practicality over hope, a decision that haunted him through sleepless nights when phantom paws still clicked across the kitchen linoleum. His daughter Sarah called twice a month from her law practice in Dallas, their conversations polite and careful, dancing around the suggestion that selling the farm might be his salvation. "Dad, you can't keep living in the past," she'd said during their last conversation, her voice carrying the patient tone she reserved for difficult clients. But Sarah didn't understand that the past was all he had left, that and the stubborn belief that Martha's final words meant something more than goodbye. The Vietnam War had taught Bob about loss, but not this kind. Tommy Rodriguez had died quickly in a rice paddy outside Da Nang, asking Bob to look after his family with his final breath. Bob had tried, sending cards and money when he could, but Tommy's son Marcus had disappeared into the system after his mother's death. Some promises, Bob learned, were harder to keep than others. Now the morning sun beat down on cracked soil that thirsted for attention Bob couldn't afford to give. The excavator sat ready for another day of maintenance work, digging ditches, clearing brush, anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from wandering into territory that offered no comfort. At 70, he'd discovered that staying busy was the only reliable anesthetic for a broken heart. The German shepherd's breathing came in shallow gasps that reminded Bob of Martha's final days. He killed the excavator's engine and climbed down, his arthritic knees protesting every step toward the irrigation ditch. Up close, the dog's condition was even worse. Deep scars crisscrossed her muzzle and shoulders, the kind of wounds that spoke of violence, not accident. "Easy there, girl," Bob whispered, kneeling at the edge of the ditch. The dog's amber eyes tracked his movement, alert despite her obvious weakness. Her swollen belly told a story that made Bob's chest tighten. She was pregnant and close to delivering. "How long you been down there, sweetheart?" The dog tried to lift her head but couldn't manage more than a tremor. Bob noticed something else that made his blood run cold. Bite marks around her neck where a collar had been, and what looked like cigarette burns on her ears. This wasn't a lost pet. This was an escaped prisoner. Without hesitation, Bob slid into the ditch, ignoring the pain that shot through his lower back. The dog didn't flinch as he gathered her into his arms, though she couldn't have weighed more than 50 pounds, half what a healthy German shepherd should carry. Her fur was matted with mud and something darker that Bob didn't want to identify. "We're going to get you help," he promised, though his bank account argued otherwise. The climb out of the ditch took longer than it should have, his 70-year-old body reminding him that heroics came with a price. He settled the dog gently in the passenger seat of his pickup truck, her head resting against his thigh as he drove toward town. Dr. Elizabeth Hayes was finishing her morning rounds at the Austin Animal Clinic when Bob pushed through the front door carrying his burden. A woman in her 40s with kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of genuine care, she took one look at the dog and immediately cleared her examination table. "Fighting dog," she said without preamble, her fingers exploring the old scars with professional detachment. "These wounds are systematic, designed to make her aggressive, not kill her. She's been through hell, Mr. Mitchell." The examination revealed the full extent of the abuse. Broken ribs that had healed poorly, infected wounds, severe malnutrition, and dehydration that should have killed her days ago. But what caught Dr. Hayes' attention was a small tattoo barely visible beneath the matted fur on the dog's inner thigh. Numbers and letters that looked official. "This might be a police dog," she murmured, squinting at the faded markings. "Or military. Hard to tell with all this scarring." The treatment would cost $2,000. Money Bob didn't have, but found himself agreeing to anyway. As Dr. Hayes prepared IV fluids and antibiotics, Bob stepped outside to call his bank, his hands shaking as he arranged to cash in the last of Martha's life insurance money. "She's lucky you found her when you did," Dr. Hayes said when Bob returned. "Another day and we'd be having a different conversation. I'd say she's been missing for weeks, maybe months. Dogs don't get this condition overnight." While the dog rested under sedation, Bob drove to the sheriff's office to file a found animal report. Sheriff Wade Thompson, a man Bob had known since high school, seemed oddly disinterested in the details. "Probably just a stray that wandered onto your property," Thompson said, barely looking up from his paperwork. "Happens all the time. You sure you want to spend good money on a dog that might belong to somebody else?" Something in Thompson's tone struck Bob as wrong, but he couldn't put his finger on what. The sheriff's suggestion to put the animal out of its misery felt more like advice than professional recommendation. Driving home, Bob couldn't shake the feeling that he was missing something important. He stopped by his neighbor's house where Eleanor Peterson was tending her prize-winning roses despite being well into her 70s. Mrs. Peterson had moved to the area 5 years ago from somewhere back east, keeping to herself but always ready with a casserole when someone needed help. "Strange thing," she said when Bob described finding the dog. "I've been hearing sounds at night, dogs barking but not the normal kind. Sounds like they're in distress. Coming from the old Henderson place, maybe 3 miles south of you." Bob knew the property. 20 acres of scrubland that had been abandoned since old Henderson died. Not the kind of place anyone would go unless they had business they didn't want seen. "You think someone's keeping dogs out there?" Bob asked. Mrs. Peterson's expression grew serious. "I think someone's doing things they shouldn't be doing, and I think that dog you found was trying to get away from whatever it was." The dog gave birth at 3 in the morning on Bob's kitchen floor, her labor starting with whimpers that pulled him from the first decent sleep he'd had in months. Dr. Hayes had warned this might happen. The stress and trauma could trigger early delivery. Bob knelt beside her, his arthritic hands surprisingly steady as he helped guide 4 tiny puppies into the world. 3 survived. The 4th, smallest one, never drew breath, and Bob found himself crying for the first time since Martha's funeral as he wrapped the still form in one of her old dish towels. The mother dog, he'd started calling her Hope, licked her surviving babies with fierce determination, her amber eyes meeting Bob's with something that looked like gratitude. "You're a fighter, aren't you, girl?" Bob whispered, watching her nudge the puppies toward warmth. Despite everything she'd endured, her maternal instincts remained strong. It reminded him of Martha during her final weeks, still trying to take care of everyone else, even as cancer ate away at her strength. The next morning brought visitors. Bob was cleaning the makeshift whelping box he'd constructed in the barn when a black Escalade crunched up his gravel driveway. 3 men emerged, but only one approached, a stocky Hispanic man in his 40s with military bearing and scars that looked fresher than the dog's. "Morning," the man said, his voice carrying an authority that didn't match his civilian clothes. "Name's Marcus Rodriguez. I believe you found something that belongs to me." The surname hit Bob like a physical blow. Rodriguez. Tommy Rodriguez had been Bob's squad mate in Vietnam, the kid from El Paso who'd saved Bob's life twice before dying in his arms in a rice paddy. Bob studied the man's face, seeing echoes of his old friend in the jawline and dark eyes. "You Tommy's boy?" Bob asked, his voice hoarse with recognition. Marcus's expression shifted, surprise flickering across his features before hardening back into business. Yeah, I am. Small world, huh? Now about my dog." "Your dog was half dead in my irrigation ditch," Bob interrupted, "covered in bite marks and burns. That how you treat your animals?" Marcus's companions shifted restlessly behind him, but he held up a hand to keep them back. "That dog is worth a lot of money to me, old man. More than you can imagine. I'm willing to pay to get her back. $10,000, cash, no questions asked." The amount staggered Bob. $10,000 would cover the remaining medical bills, stop the foreclosure, maybe even leave enough to fix the barn roof. It was salvation wrapped in dirty money, and Bob could see Martha's disapproval in his mind as clearly as if she were standing beside him. "Money's not the issue here, son," Bob said, though his voice lacked conviction. "That dog's been through hell. She's got babies now." "Needs time to heal." Marcus stepped closer, and Bob caught sight of more scars along his neck, burn marks that looked military in nature. "Mr. Mitchell, is it? Let me explain something. That dog is trained to fight. She's killed other dogs, torn them apart for sport. She's dangerous, and keeping her puts you and your neighbors at risk." The words felt like lies, but Marcus delivered them with conviction. Bob thought about Hope's gentle response to his touch, how she'd allowed him to handle her babies without so much as a growl. Fighting dogs weren't supposed to show that kind of trust. If she's so dangerous, how come she's been nothing but gentle since I found her? "Because she's smart," Marcus replied. "Smart enough to play the victim when it suits her. Look, I respect what you did in Vietnam. My old man talked about you, said you saved his life more than once. But this is business, and sentiment doesn't pay bills." The mention of Tommy felt like manipulation, but Bob couldn't deny the financial reality. His phone had been ringing all morning with calls from creditors, and the bank had left another message about the foreclosure timeline. $10,000 was more money than he'd seen at once since Martha's life insurance payout. "I need time to think about it," Bob said finally. Marcus nodded, but his expression suggested patience had limits. 48 hours. After that, I'll have to collect what's mine by other means. And Mr. Mitchell, I'd advise against calling the sheriff. Wade Thompson and I have an understanding." After the men left, Bob sat in his kitchen staring at the phone number Marcus had written on a business card. No company name, just digits and a single word: security. The implications made his stomach turn. If Sheriff Thompson was involved, then whatever Marcus was running had official protection. Mrs. Peterson appeared at his door an hour later with a casserole and questions. Bob found himself telling her everything, from the dog's condition to Marcus's offer to the sheriff's odd behavior. "I did some research after our conversation yesterday," she said, settling into Martha's old chair like she belonged there. "The Henderson property was sold 18 months ago to a shell company. No permits filed, no improvements declared, but I've seen vehicles coming and going at night." She paused, studying Bob's face. "Robert, I need to tell you something. I wasn't entirely honest about my background yesterday. I worked for the Bureau before I retired, FBI, and what you're describing sounds like organized animal cruelty, possibly connected to illegal gambling." Bob felt the world shift beneath him. "You're saying that dog?" "I'm saying that dog might be evidence in a federal case. And if Marcus Rodriguez is who I think he is, then you've stumbled into something much bigger than a lost pet." Mrs. Peterson leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "The question is, are you willing to do what's right, even if it costs you everything?" The weight of the decision settled on Bob's shoulders like a familiar burden. Outside, Hope was nursing her puppies in the barn, trusting him to keep them safe. Inside, the bills on his kitchen table reminded him that heroics were luxuries he couldn't afford. But somewhere in between, Tommy Rodriguez's voice echoed across nearly 50 years. "Take care of my family." Maybe it was time to figure out what that really meant. Mrs. Peterson returned the next morning with a manila folder thick enough to choke a horse and coffee strong enough to wake the dead. Bob cleared the medical bills from his kitchen table, making room for what she called the real story. "Her name isn't Hope," Mrs. Peterson said, sliding a photograph across the table. "It's Hero. K-9 Officer Hero, badge number 847, New York Police Department. She was part of the search and rescue teams at Ground Zero." Bob stared at the photograph, the same amber eyes, the same intelligent expression, but the dog in the picture was healthy, proud, wearing a police vest and standing beside a uniformed officer. The transformation was heartbreaking. "She saved 15 people from the rubble," Mrs. Peterson continued, "made national news. There were documentaries, a book deal, even talk of a movie. Then something went wrong." The file told a story Bob wasn't prepared for. Hero had developed what veterinary psychologists called canine PTSD after 9/11, becoming increasingly anxious and unpredictable. The department had tried therapy, medication, specialized training. Nothing worked. Finally, they'd declared her unfit for service and arranged for retirement with a suburban family in New Jersey. "That was 2 years ago," Mrs. Peterson said. "The family reported her stolen 8 months later. Newark PD investigated, but the trail went cold. No one connected her disappearance to the underground fighting circuit until now." Bob's hands trembled as he turned the pages. Crime scene photos showed the aftermath of illegal dogfights, blood-stained concrete, makeshift arenas, betting slips scattered like confetti. The money involved wasn't small time. Some fights drew 6-figure wagers. "Marcus Rodriguez," Mrs. Peterson said, pointing to a surveillance photograph, "is what we call a mid-level operator. Not the biggest fish, but not small time either. He runs a circuit through Texas, Oklahoma, and Arkansas. The profits help fund other activities: drugs, weapons, human trafficking. The photograph showed Marcus in conversation with Sheriff Thompson outside what looked like an abandoned warehouse. The timestamp was recent, less than 3 weeks ago. "Wade's been on the payroll for at least 6 months," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Provides advance warning about raids, helps with evidence disposal, makes sure certain reports never get filed. Classic corruption pattern." Bob felt sick. Wade Thompson had been homecoming king the year Bob graduated high school. They'd played poker together for 20 years before Martha's illness ended Bob's social life. To discover his friend was dirty felt like another death in a year already too full of them. "So what's the play here?" Bob asked. "I call the FBI, and then what? Marcus disappears, the evidence gets destroyed, and I'm left with a target on my back?" Mrs. Peterson smiled grimly. "That's where things get complicated. The Bureau's been building a case for 18 months, but they need something concrete to move forward. Hero could be that evidence, if we can prove she was part of the fighting circuit." Over the next 3 days, Bob's world became a careful dance of deception. He maintained normal routines while Mrs. Peterson coordinated with her former colleagues. Hero, he couldn't think of her as Hope anymore, grew stronger each day, her maternal instincts fierce as she cared for the 3 surviving puppies. The dog's intelligence became more apparent as she recovered. She understood complex commands, could open doors, even seemed to recognize the sound of Marcus's Escalade from half a mile away. When federal agents finally arrived to examine her, they found dental records that confirmed her identity and scars that told the story of her ordeal. "She's been through systematic conditioning," explained Dr. Sarah Chen, a veterinary behaviorist with the FBI's Animal Cruelty Task Force. Classic fighting dog preparation, controlled aggression training, pain conditioning, socialization suppression. It's designed to turn naturally protective instincts into weapons. But Hero's response to Bob defied their expectations. She followed him everywhere, positioned herself between him and strangers, and showed none of the aggression typical of fighting dogs. When one of the agents suggested she might be too damaged to rehabilitate, Hero seemed to understand the conversation and moved closer to Bob, as if seeking protection. "She's choosing her pack," Dr. Chen observed. "That's actually a very positive sign. She's recovering her natural instincts." The breakthrough came when Mrs. Peterson's surveillance equipment captured audio from the Henderson property. The sounds were exactly what she'd suspected. Dogs barking in distress, men shouting encouragement, the distinctive noise of money changing hands. More importantly, they caught Marcus's voice, clearly identifying Hero as the cop dog and discussing plans to retrieve her. "We move tonight," Agent David Martinez told Bob during their final briefing. "Marcus is planning to collect Hero tomorrow one way or another. We need to be in position before he arrives." Bob's role was simple but dangerous. Act natural, let Marcus make his pitch, wear a wire to record the conversation. If Marcus took the bait and admitted to the fighting operation, they'd have enough for arrests across 3 states. "What if he just decides to take her by force?" Bob asked. Martinez and Mrs. Peterson exchanged glances. "That's what we're hoping for," Martinez admitted. "Theft of federal evidence, assault, conspiracy, the charges would stack up fast. But Mr. Mitchell, I won't lie to you. There's real risk here." That evening, Bob sat in his barn watching Hero nurse her puppies. The smallest one, a female with Hero's amber eyes, had already claimed the spot closest to her mother's heart. Bob had started thinking of her as Hope, a name that seemed to fit better than her mother's official designation. "Your daddy would be proud of what you survived," Bob told Hero, remembering Tommy Rodriguez's courage under fire. "But he'd be ashamed of what his boy became." Hero lifted her head, those intelligent eyes meeting his with understanding. For a moment, Bob could almost see the proud police dog she'd been, the hero who'd saved lives in humanity's darkest hour. The transformation Marcus's people had tried to force on her was cruel beyond measure. The sound of vehicles approaching broke the peaceful moment. Through the barn window, Bob watched 3 trucks pull into his driveway. Not just Marcus's Escalade, but additional vehicles carrying at least 8 men. This wasn't a business negotiation, it was a raid. Bob's phone buzzed with a text from Mrs. Peterson. "Too many. Abort. Get to safe room." But as Bob looked at Hero and her babies, he realized there was nowhere to run. The puppies couldn't be moved safely, and Hero wouldn't abandon them. Whatever was about to happen, they'd face it together. Marcus approached the barn with confident strides, but his companions fanned out in tactical formation. These weren't street thugs. They moved with military precision. "Time's up, old man," Marcus called out. "I gave you 48 hours to think it over. Hope you made the right choice." Bob stepped out of the barn, hands visible but not raised. The wire beneath his shirt felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. "I'm thinking 10,000 isn't enough," Bob said, following the script they'd rehearsed. "Dog like that, with her breeding and training, she's worth more." Marcus smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "You know what she is, don't you? Figured it out somehow. That makes this more complicated." "Makes it more expensive," Bob corrected. "Hero's a celebrity. NYPD K9, 9/11 hero, national news coverage. Someone's going to pay big money to see America's sweetheart torn apart in a fighting ring." The words tasted like poison, but they had the desired effect. Marcus's expression shifted from suspicion to interest. "You're sharper than I gave you credit for." "Yeah, she's worth more than 10 grand in the right venue. Problem is, now you know too much to just walk away." Bob's heart hammered against his ribs. "I'm not walking anywhere. I want in on the action." Marcus laughed, a sound devoid of humor. "You? Old man, you can barely stand up straight. What makes you think you could handle this business?" "Because I need the money more than I need my conscience," Bob said, the partial truth giving weight to his words. "Medical bills killed my savings. Bank's foreclosing next month. And I got nothing left to lose." For a moment, Marcus seemed to consider the proposition, then his expression hardened again. "Problem with that story, Mr. Mitchell, is that someone's been asking questions about our operation, someone with federal connections, and the only new player in this game is you." Bob's blood turned to ice water. Somehow, Marcus had discovered the investigation. "I don't know what you're talking about," Bob said. But even as the words left his mouth, he knew it was over. Marcus pulled a pistol from beneath his jacket. "Mrs. Eleanor Peterson, retired FBI, currently providing consulting services to the Animal Cruelty Task Force. She's been watching our operation for months, and suddenly you find our prize fighter in your irrigation ditch. That's not coincidence, old man. That's a setup." The other men raised their weapons, and Bob realized he was about to die for trying to do the right thing. Somewhere in the distance he could hear sirens approaching, but they wouldn't arrive in time. "My father talked about you," Marcus said, his voice softening with something that might have been regret. "Said you were the kind of soldier who'd die before leaving a man behind. Guess we're about to find out if that's true." The standoff stretched like a wire about to snap. Bob counted 8 armed men spread across his property, their positions chosen with military precision. Marcus kept his pistol trained on Bob's chest while his eyes darted toward the approaching sirens. The sound was still distant but growing stronger, maybe 5 minutes out. "You know what the funny thing is?" Marcus said, his voice carrying across the barnyard. "My old man really did talk about you. Said you were the one white boy in the whole damn platoon who treated him like family. Said you carried him 2 miles through enemy territory with a bullet in your own leg." Bob remembered that day, the ambush outside Da Nang, Tommy bleeding out from shrapnel wounds, the long stumble through rice paddies while Viet Cong patrols searched for survivors. He'd made a promise to a dying friend, and now that friend's son was pointing a gun at his heart. "Tommy would be ashamed of what you became," Bob said, his voice steadier than he felt. Marcus's jaw tightened. "Tommy died believing in a country that threw his son away. You know how many jobs I applied for after the Army discharged me? How many times I heard, 'We don't hire your type,' or 'Sorry, position filled,' right after they saw my face." The bitterness in his voice was raw, genuine. Bob recognized the anger. He'd felt it himself after Vietnam, when coming home meant protests and spitting and being called a baby killer by people who'd never seen war. "So you decided to become the monster they said you were?" Bob asked. "I decided to survive," Marcus snapped, "and to make the people who wrote me off pay for underestimating me. You think I enjoy what I do? You think I like watching animals tear each other apart for rich men's entertainment?" Behind Bob, Hero emerged from the barn, her puppies whimpering in distress. She moved slowly, still weak from birth, but her eyes were alert and focused on the armed men surrounding her protector. Bob held up a hand, trying to keep her back, but she ignored the gesture. "That dog's been through enough," Bob said. "Let me get her and the babies inside. Then we can settle this between us." Marcus shook his head. "She comes with us, tonight. The buyers are expecting her for tomorrow night's main event." "Big money's riding on this fight." "What buyers?" Bob pressed, knowing the FBI would need names. "Who's willing to pay that kind of money to watch a PTSD dog get torn apart?" "You really want to know?" Marcus's smile was ugly. "Politicians, mostly. Judges, police chiefs, military brass. People who spend their days pretending to care about heroes while they bet on watching them die. There's a state senator coming tomorrow night who's already laid down 50 grand on the outcome." The admission was everything the FBI needed, but Bob wondered if he'd live long enough for it to matter. The sirens were closer now, maybe 3 minutes, but Marcus's men had positioned themselves to control all the approaches to the property. "Even if you kill me, they'll get you," Bob said. "Mrs. Peterson's been recording everything. The whole operation's blown." Marcus nodded grimly. "Yeah, we figured that out about an hour ago. Found her surveillance equipment, her communications gear, real professional setup. She's good. I'll give her that." Bob's heart sank. If they'd compromised Mrs. Peterson's operation, then the approaching sirens might not be federal agents at all. They could be Sheriff Thompson and his deputies coming to clean up loose ends. "Here's what's going to happen," Marcus continued. "You're going to call off those agents. Tell them it was all a misunderstanding, that the dog ran away and you found her dead. In exchange, I'll make your death quick instead of letting the boys have fun with you first." Hero took another step forward, and Bob saw something in her posture that made his blood run cold. She wasn't cowering or seeking comfort. She was positioning herself between the threat and her babies. Despite everything she'd endured, her protective instincts were intact. "She's not going to let you take those puppies," Bob said. Marcus glanced at Hero, then back at Bob. "Then we'll kill her here and take them anyway. Newborn fighting dogs sell for premium prices if they're properly conditioned from birth." The casual cruelty of the statement hit Bob like a physical blow. He thought of Martha, of Charlie, of all the promises he'd made and broken. Then he thought of Tommy Rodriguez, dying in his arms with words about taking care of family. "Tommy asked me to look after his family," Bob said quietly. "I tried to find you after the war, sent letters to your mother, tried to track you down through the VA, never could locate you." Something flickered in Marcus's eyes, surprise, maybe even pain. "Ma died when I was 16. Diabetes, no insurance, couldn't afford treatment. I was in foster care after that, then the Army soon as I turned 18. "I could have helped," Bob said. "If I'd found you." "You'd have done what?" Marcus's voice cracked with old hurt. "Saved me from myself? Turned me into a good little soldier who says, 'Yes, sir,' and Thank you, sir, while they use me up and throw me away." The sirens were very close now, but instead of relief, Bob felt dread. Through the growing darkness he could see vehicle lights approaching on the main road, too many vehicles coming too fast. "Those aren't FBI," Bob realized aloud. Marcus smiled grimly. "Sheriff Thompson's bringing a few extra deputies for this one." "Don't worry, they'll make sure your death looks like a tragic accident. Old man tries to stop dog thieves, gets shot in the confusion. Very sad story." Hero took another step forward, and this time Bob saw what had changed in her posture. She wasn't just protecting anymore, she was hunting. The fighting conditioning Marcus's people had forced on her was still there, buried beneath maternal instincts, but not gone. Her lips pulled back slightly, revealing teeth that could tear through leather. "You trained her to kill," Bob said, "but you never broke her spirit. She knows who the real enemy is." Marcus followed Bob's gaze to Hero, and for the first time since arriving, he looked uncertain. "Stay back," he warned the dog. But Hero continued her slow advance. The first sheriff's vehicle turned into Bob's driveway, headlights sweeping across the barnyard. But instead of the smooth coordination Marcus expected, chaos erupted. The lead car suddenly accelerated, ramming into one of Marcus's trucks with a crash of metal and glass. "FBI! Everyone on the ground! Now!" The voice boomed through a megaphone as federal agents poured from vehicles that had been disguised as sheriff's units. Mrs. Peterson had anticipated the corruption and fed Thompson false information while positioning the real raid team. Marcus's men opened fire, muzzle flashes lighting up the barnyard like deadly fireworks. Bob dove toward the barn as bullets whined overhead, but Hero didn't retreat. Instead, she launched herself at the nearest gunman with a snarl that spoke of months of abuse and the rage of a mother protecting her young. The man screamed as 60 pounds of trained attack dog hit him in the chest, his weapon flying into the darkness. Hero's jaws clamped onto his gun arm, and decades of police training took over. She'd been conditioned to fight, but her original programming ran deeper. Protect the innocent, stop the threat, serve and protect. Marcus spun toward the commotion, his pistol tracking Hero's movement. "Goddamn dog!" Bob saw the shot coming and threw himself forward, his 70-year-old body moving with desperation born of love. The bullet meant for Hero caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to his knees in the dirt. Through the haze of pain, Bob watched federal agents swarm the property. Marcus's military training showed as he retreated toward the barn, using cover and concealment to avoid the closing net. But Hero had tasted blood, and her prey drive was fully awakened. She released the gunman and bounded toward Marcus, her amber eyes blazing with predatory focus. For a moment, she looked exactly like the weapon his people had tried to create, lethal, focused, unstoppable. Marcus raised his pistol, but Hero was already airborne. She hit him like a canine missile, driving him backward into the barn wall with bone-crushing force. The gun discharged harmlessly into the roof as they went down together. "Hero! No!" Bob gasped, struggling to his feet despite the blood streaming down his arm. He could see the killing rage in the dog's eyes, the conditioning that Marcus's people had beaten into her. One more second, and she'd tear out his throat. But at the sound of Bob's voice, Hero hesitated. Her jaws were inches from Marcus's neck, her weight pinning him to the ground, but she didn't complete the kill. Instead, she looked back at Bob with eyes that held a question. "Easy, girl," Bob whispered, extending his good hand toward her. "Easy. You're not like them. You're better than they tried to make you." Hero held Marcus down for another heartbeat, then slowly backed away. She'd made her choice: protection over revenge, humanity over conditioning. The weapon they'd tried to create had remembered she was a hero. Marcus lay gasping on the barn floor, staring up at the dog that had spared his life. Agent Martinez appeared with handcuffs, but his eyes were on Bob's bleeding shoulder. "Medic!" Martinez shouted. "We need a medic over here." As EMTs rushed to treat his wound, Bob looked toward the barn where Hero's puppies were crying for their mother. She'd protected them all. Bob, the babies, even Marcus in the end. Despite everything they'd done to break her, she'd chosen mercy. She remembered who she really was, Bob told Dr. Chen as the veterinarian examined Hero for new injuries. Under all that conditioning, she remembered she was supposed to protect people, not hurt them. Dr. Chen nodded, running gentle hands over Hero's flanks. "She's remarkable. Most fighting dogs can't come back from that level of conditioning. But she had something they couldn't break. Her bond with humans. Her love." In the distance, Marcus was being loaded into a federal transport vehicle, his empire crashing down around him. Sheriff Thompson had been arrested at his home, and raids were happening simultaneously across 3 states. The underground fighting circuit that had tortured Hero and hundreds of other dogs was finished. But as Bob watched Hero return to her babies, he realized the real victory wasn't legal, it was moral. She'd been given every reason to hate, to kill, to become the monster they'd tried to create. Instead, she'd chosen love, just like Tommy Rodriguez would have wanted his son to do. The bullet had shattered more than Bob's shoulder. It had shattered his illusions about recovery being simple. 3 days in Austin General Hospital gave him plenty of time to stare at ceiling tiles and contemplate the wreckage of his life. The surgery had been successful, but at 77, healing came slowly and expensively. Dr. Hayes visited on the 2nd day, her face grave as she delivered news Bob had been dreading. "Hero's not eating," she said, settling into the uncomfortable hospital chair beside his bed. "She's producing milk for the puppies, but she won't take food for herself. Classic stress response after trauma." Bob closed his eyes, feeling the familiar weight of failure settling on his chest. "I should have protected her better. Should have seen Marcus coming with that many men." "You saved her life twice," Dr. Hayes countered. "Once from that ditch, and again when you stopped her from killing Marcus. That dog was seconds away from becoming everything his people tried to make her, and you pulled her back." But Bob couldn't shake the image of Hero's eyes in those final moments before the agents arrived, the cold calculation, the predatory focus. For a heartbeat, she'd been the weapon Marcus had created, not the hero she'd once been. "What if she can't come back from it?" Bob asked. "What if seeing me get shot, having to fight again, what if it broke something permanent?" Dr. Hayes was quiet for a long moment. "Dogs are resilient, Mr. Mitchell, but they're also honest. If Hero can't trust the world again, she won't pretend otherwise. The question is whether we can create a world worthy of her trust." That afternoon brought Sarah, his daughter, driving down from Dallas with a lawyer's briefcase full of problems Bob couldn't solve from a hospital bed. At 32, she carried herself with Martha's determination, but had inherited Bob's stubborn streak, a combination that had led to 3 years of careful distance between them. "The farm's in foreclosure," she said without preamble, spreading legal documents across his hospital tray. "The medical bills from Mom's treatment, now this hospital stay, plus the veterinary costs for that dog. Dad, you're looking at bankruptcy." Bob studied his daughter's face, seeing Martha in the worried crease between her eyebrows. "I know you think I should have sold the place years ago." "I think you should have asked for help," Sarah interrupted. "I'm a lawyer, Dad. I have resources. But you were so determined to handle everything alone that you nearly got yourself killed." The accusation stung because it was true. Bob had wrapped himself in independence like armor, refusing charity even from family. Now that armor had become a prison, "The FBI victims' compensation might cover some of the costs," Sarah continued, "but it won't be fast enough to stop the foreclosure. And there's something else. The media's picked up on the story. She handed him a tablet showing news reports from across the country. Hero dog saves Vietnam veteran. 9/11 hero survives dog fighting ring. Elderly farmer risks life for police dog. The photos made Bob wince. Him being loaded into an ambulance. Hero standing protectively over her puppies. Marcus Rodriguez in handcuffs. "Everyone wants to interview you," Sarah said. "Good Morning America, CNN, local stations. The story's gone viral on social media. Save Hero is trending." Bob pushed the tablet away. "I didn't do this for attention." "I know that. But attention brings money, and money might save the farm. There's already a GoFundMe page. Someone started it without asking permission. It's raised $40,000 in 2 days." The number made Bob's head spin. Strangers were sending money to help a man they'd never met save a dog they'd only heard about. It felt wrong somehow, like accepting charity under false pretenses. "I'm not a hero," Bob said quietly. "I'm just an old man who couldn't stand to watch something suffer." Sarah leaned forward, taking his good hand in both of hers. "Dad, that's exactly what a hero is. Someone who does the right thing when it would be easier to walk away." That evening, Bob insisted on leaving the hospital against medical advice. The doctor protested, Sarah argued, but Bob had made up his mind. Hero was refusing to eat, and he couldn't help her from a hospital bed. Dr. Hayes met them at the clinic after hours, leading Bob to the recovery room where Hero lay with her 3 puppies. The change in her was heartbreaking. She'd lost more weight, her amber eyes dull with depression. The puppies were thriving, but their mother was fading. "Hero," Bob whispered, kneeling beside her despite the pain in his shoulder. "Hey there, girl. I'm sorry I left you." Hero lifted her head slightly, recognizing his voice, but didn't rise to greet him. The spark that had burned so bright during the confrontation with Marcus seemed extinguished. Bob spent the night in the clinic, sleeping on an air mattress beside Hero's pen. He woke every few hours to check on her, offering food and water that she consistently refused. By morning, Dr. Hayes was talking about IV nutrition and force feeding. "She's giving up," Dr. Hayes said during the dawn examination. "Sometimes dogs do this after severe trauma. They decide the world is too painful to engage with anymore." Bob watched Hero nuzzle her puppies, providing for them even as she wasted away. The parallel to Martha's final weeks was unbearable. His wife had done the same thing, caring for everyone else while letting herself fade. "What did Martha always say?" Bob murmured, remembering his wife's voice. "You can't save someone who doesn't want to be saved, but you can love them enough to make the choice worthwhile." The media attention Sarah had warned about materialized over the next 2 days. News vans lined Bob's driveway, reporters shouting questions every time he left the house. The GoFundMe account had grown to $60,000, with donations coming from across the country. A publisher had called about book rights. Hollywood agents were leaving messages about movie deals, but Hero continued to decline. Dr. Hayes started IV fluids on day 4, warning that without nutrition, the dog's milk production would fail and the puppies would be at risk. Bob made the hardest decision of his life. He agreed to let the clinic find foster homes for the puppies if Hero didn't improve. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Peterson arrived at the clinic carrying a small wooden box and wearing the expression of someone delivering bad news. "These were in Hero's kennel at the fighting compound," she said, opening the box to reveal a collection of items that made Bob's throat tighten. A child's toy soldier, worn smooth from handling, a faded ribbon that might once have been blue, a small American flag pin, the kind given to military families. "They belonged to her original handler," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Officer Michael Santos, killed in the line of duty 6 months after 9/11. Hero was retired early because she wouldn't work with anyone else. Kept looking for him, waiting for him to come back. Bob understood then what Hero was doing. She wasn't just refusing to eat, she was refusing to hope. Every time someone had asked her to trust, to bond, to love again, the world had taken that person away. First Officer Santos, then the family who'd adopted her, now potentially Bob. She's not depressed, Bob realized. She's protecting herself. If she doesn't get attached, it won't hurt when we abandon her. That night, Bob made a decision that Sarah would later call either inspired or insane. He moved into the clinic's recovery room permanently, setting up a cot beside Hero's pen. If she wouldn't trust the world, maybe she could trust one old man who understood what it felt like to lose everything that mattered. "I'm not going anywhere," he told Hero that first night, his good arm reaching through the pen to stroke her fur. "I know everyone else has left you, but I'm staying right here. We're going to figure this out together." For the first time in days, Hero's tail moved. Just a slight twitch, but movement nonetheless. It was the smallest possible sign of hope, but Bob held on to it like a lifeline. By the end of the week, Hero had taken her first sips of water while Bob watched. The puppies were healthy and growing, their eyes beginning to open to a world their mother was slowly deciding might be worth trusting after all. But Bob knew that healing Hero meant more than just getting her to eat again. It meant helping her remember that love didn't always end in loss. Sometimes it led to new beginnings. The hardest part was that he wasn't sure he believed it himself. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday, jolting Bob awake on his cot beside Hero's recovery pen. Dr. Hayes's voice was tight with controlled panic as she explained that Hero had gone into seizures during the night shift. By the time Bob threw on clothes and rushed to the main treatment room, Hero was unconscious on the examination table, IV lines snaking from her front legs like technological lifelines. "It's not uncommon after severe trauma," Dr. Hayes explained, but her hands shook as she checked Hero's vital signs. The stress, the malnutrition, the psychological trauma, sometimes the body just shuts down. Her brain is essentially protecting itself by going offline. Bob stared at Hero's still form, her chest rising and falling with mechanical rhythm. After 2 weeks of slow progress, taking food from his hand, allowing him to touch her without flinching, even playing briefly with her puppies, this felt like a cruel reversal. "Is she going to wake up?" Bob asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to hear the answer. "I don't know," Dr. Hayes admitted. "Her brain activity is minimal but present. It's like she's chosen to retreat somewhere we can't reach her." Sarah arrived within the hour, still in pajamas under her hastily thrown-on coat. She found Bob holding Hero's paw, whispering stories about Martha and Charlie and the farm where healing could happen if someone just had the courage to try again. "Dad," Sarah said gently, "maybe it's time to consider that she's suffered enough." The suggestion hit Bob like a physical blow. "You're talking about putting her down. I'm talking about letting her go peacefully instead of forcing her to keep fighting when she's clearly tired of the battle." Bob looked at his daughter, successful, pragmatic, carrying Martha's wisdom about knowing when to hold on and when to let go. Everything logical said Sarah was right. Hero had endured more trauma than any living being should have to bear. Maybe merciful death was the kindest gift he could give her, but something in Bob's war-scarred heart rebelled against the logic. He'd held too many dying friends in Vietnam, watched Martha slip away despite every medical intervention available. He was tired of losing battles to forces beyond his control. "Give me 48 hours, Bob said. "If she doesn't show improvement in 48 hours, I'll make that decision." Dr. Hayes nodded reluctantly, but her expression suggested she thought Bob was prolonging inevitable heartbreak. Over the next day and a half, Bob barely left Hero's side. He talked to her unconscious form about everything and nothing, Vietnam stories she'd already heard, Memories of Martha's laugh, detailed descriptions of the farm's seasonal changes. He read her articles about police dogs, played recordings of Officer Santos's voice that Mrs. Peterson had somehow obtained, even brought in one of Hero's surviving puppies to nurse while she lay unconscious. The puppy, a female Bob had started calling Hope, seemed to understand her mother's condition. She would curl up against Hero's side, her tiny body warm against the still form, occasionally letting out small whimpers that sounded remarkably like questions. On Wednesday evening, with less than 12 hours remaining on Bob's self-imposed deadline, Mrs. Peterson arrived with news that changed everything. She carried another manila folder, this one containing documents that made Bob's hands tremble as he read. "Marcus Rodriguez has been talking," she said, settling into the chair Sarah had vacated for dinner. "Trying to reduce his sentence by providing information about the operation's scope." "What he told us, Bob, it's bigger than we imagined." The documents revealed a network spanning 7 states, with connections to organized crime families and corrupt officials at every level. Hero hadn't been just another stolen dog. She'd been specifically targeted because of her fame and training. The psychological breaking process had been deliberate and systematic, designed to turn America's canine hero into a symbol of corruption. "They wanted to broadcast her final fight," Mrs. Peterson continued. "Dark web streaming, international audience, bets running into the millions. The plan was to market it as America's Hero Falls, ultimate degradation of a 9/11 symbol." Bob felt sick. The scope of cruelty was beyond his comprehension, but something else in the documents caught his attention. A list of other dogs recovered from various fighting rings, many of them former military or police K9s who'd been stolen and forced into the same conditioning program. "How many of them survived?" Bob asked. Mrs. Peterson's expression grew pained. "Of the 23 recovered dogs, only 7 are still alive. The others, the psychological trauma was too severe. They either died from stress-related conditions or had to be euthanized for public safety." The numbers hit Bob like artillery shells. Hero was one of 7 survivors out of 23 heroes. The weight of that statistic made his chest ache, but it also crystallized something important in his mind. She's not just fighting for herself, Bob realized. She's carrying the trauma of all the others who didn't make it. No wonder she's retreating. Mrs. Peterson nodded. "Dr. Chen thinks Hero may be experiencing what they call survivor guilt, the same condition that affects human trauma victims. She may feel responsible for the other dogs' deaths." That night, Bob made a decision that would have seemed insane to anyone who didn't understand the depths of both love and desperation. He climbed into Hero's treatment pen, ignoring Dr. Hayes's protests about sterility and medical protocols, and lay down beside the unconscious dog. "Listen to me, Hero," he whispered, his face close to her ear. "I know you're in there, and I know you're carrying weight that isn't yours to bear. Those other dogs, their deaths aren't your fault. You surviving doesn't dishonor their memory. It honors it." Hero's breathing remained steady but unchanged. Bob continued anyway. "I carried guilt for 47 years about Tommy Rodriguez dying in that rice paddy. Told myself if I'd been faster, smarter, braver, maybe I could have saved him. But Martha used to say that survival isn't a sin, it's a responsibility. We survive so we can make their sacrifice mean something." Bob's voice cracked as exhaustion and emotion overwhelmed his reserve. "I'm tired, girl. Tired of losing everyone I care about. Tired of watching good things get destroyed by evil people. But I'm not tired of fighting for what's right. And neither are you. Not really." Somewhere during his whispered monologue, Bob fell asleep curled around Hero's still form. Dr. Hayes found them that way at dawn. The old man and the broken dog sharing warmth and maybe something more fundamental. The understanding that healing sometimes required literal proximity to love. Bob woke to sensation he hadn't felt in weeks. Hero's tongue gently licking his face. Her amber eyes were open, clouded with confusion but unmistakably aware. She was weak, shaky, but present in a way she hadn't been since the seizures began. "There you are," Bob whispered, afraid to move and break the spell. "I was worried you'd decided to stay away." Hero's tail moved. Not much, but enough to rustle the blanket covering them both. She lifted her head slightly, looking around the treatment room as if seeing it for the first time. When Hope, her surviving puppy, was brought in for feeding, Hero actually shifted position to make nursing easier. Dr. Hayes ran every test she could think of, but the results defied medical explanation. Hero's brain activity had normalized overnight. Her vital signs showed improvement, and most importantly, she was engaging with her environment again. "I've never seen anything like it," Dr. Hayes admitted. "From a medical standpoint, there's no reason she should have recovered so completely, so quickly." But Bob understood what the medical charts couldn't measure. Hero had made the same choice he'd made countless times over the past 3 years. The choice to keep living despite having every reason to give up. Not because life had become easy or pain-free, but because someone was counting on her to survive. Over the next week, Hero's physical recovery accelerated dramatically. She began eating regular meals, playing with her puppy, and showing interest in the world beyond her recovery pen. More importantly, she started displaying the intelligence and training that had made her legendary. When Agent Martinez visited to discuss Hero's future, she demonstrated behaviors that left everyone stunned. She could still detect explosives, still responded to complex commands, still possessed the skills that had saved 15 lives at Ground Zero. The psychological conditioning imposed by the fighting ring had damaged her trust but hadn't destroyed her abilities. "She could return to active duty," Martinez suggested. "With proper rehabilitation, she might be able to work again." Bob felt Hero tense beside him at the suggestion. Her amber eyes found his, and in them he read a simple message. No more service to strangers, no more separation from the people she'd learned to trust. "She's earned her retirement," Bob said firmly, "multiple times over." The revelation that would change everything came from Marcus Rodriguez himself. During his final debriefing session, facing life in federal prison, he made a confession that shattered Bob's understanding of the entire situation. "The old man asked me about my father," Marcus told Agent Martinez, his voice hollow with regret. "Tommy Rodriguez. He was right. My dad would be ashamed of what I became. But there's something else Bob needs to know, something I should have told him that night." Marcus's confession, delivered through Mrs. Peterson in Hero's recovery room, reframed everything Bob thought he understood about the confrontation at his farm. "He threw the fight," Mrs. Peterson said, her voice heavy with implications. Marcus deliberately positioned his men poorly, left escape routes open, made sure the FBI could track their communications. He wanted to be caught. Bob stared at her, not comprehending. "Why?" "Because he recognized you. Because his father's stories about the man who carried him through enemy territory meant something. Because even after everything that had happened to him, he couldn't bring himself to kill Tommy Rodriguez's friend." The revelation hit Bob like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't been betrayed by corrupt officials or outmaneuvered by superior tactics. He'd orchestrated his own downfall rather than dishonor his father's memory by murdering the man Tommy had died protecting. He said to tell you that he's entering a plea agreement, Mrs. Peterson continued, testimony against the entire network in exchange for a reduced sentence and assignment to a federal facility with PTSD treatment programs. He wants to try becoming the man his father would have been proud of. Bob looked down at Hero, who was watching him with those intelligent amber eyes, two broken veterans and a traumatized dog, all of them trying to figure out how to live with honor in a world that often rewarded cruelty. Redemption, Bob said quietly, the word feeling strange on his tongue. Maybe that's what we're all really looking for. Hero's tail wagged once, as if in agreement. Outside the recovery room windows, autumn was giving way to winter, but inside, something that had been frozen was finally beginning to thaw. 6 months after pulling a skeletal German Shepherd from his irrigation ditch, Bob Mitchell stood in his farmyard watching his 8-year-old grandsons chase Hero's 3 healthy puppies through the spring grass. The scene was so normal, so full of uncomplicated joy, that he had to lean against the porch railing to steady himself against the weight of gratitude. The transformation had been gradual, but profound. The GoFundMe campaign had raised over $200,000, enough to save the farm and establish Martha's Haven, a retirement sanctuary for military and police K-9 veterans. The first resident, besides Hero, was a bomb detection dog named Rex, who'd lost a leg in Afghanistan. The second was a retired drug detection shepherd whose PTSD made him unsuitable for continued service, but perfect for therapeutic work with traumatized children. Sarah had moved back to the farm with her twin boys, converting the old hired hand's cottage into a comfortable family home while helping Bob manage the legal and administrative aspects of the sanctuary. Her law practice now specialized in animal rights cases, and she'd discovered a passion for advocacy that reminded Bob painfully of Martha's fierce protectiveness toward anything vulnerable. "Dad, you're wool gathering again," Sarah said, joining him on the porch with 2 cups of coffee and a smile that had become more frequent as the months passed. The bitter edge that had characterized their relationship since Martha's death had softened into something that felt like the companionship they'd shared when she was young. "Just watching," Bob replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. "Still can't believe how normal this feels. 6 months ago, I was ready to give up on everything." Hero emerged from the barn where she'd been checking on a new arrival, a retired Coast Guard dog whose handler had died in a boating accident. She moved with confidence now, her coat shining with health, but she never strayed far from Bob's vicinity. The bond between them had deepened into something that transcended the typical human-animal relationship. "She's still protective," Sarah observed, watching Hero position herself where she could monitor both Bob and the playing children. "Dr. Chen says that's normal for dogs who've experienced trauma. They become hypervigilant about their chosen pack." The psychological rehabilitation had been as important as the physical healing. Hero worked twice weekly with Dr. Chen, learning to trust her own instincts again while processing the trauma of her captivity. The breakthrough had come when they introduced her to other recovered fighting dogs, allowing her to understand that she wasn't alone in her experience. "Remember when you thought she might be too damaged to recover?" Bob asked. Sarah nodded, her expression growing thoughtful. "I was wrong about a lot of things. About her, about you, about what healing looks like. I thought it had to be linear, steady improvement day after day. I didn't understand that sometimes healing means learning to live with scars." The legal aftermath had exceeded everyone's expectations. Marcus Rodriguez's cooperation had led to the arrest of 43 people across 7 states, including 3 judges, 2 police chiefs, and a sitting state senator. The underground fighting network had been completely dismantled, with rescued animals being rehabilitated at facilities across the country. Marcus himself was serving a reduced sentence at a federal facility in Colorado, participating in a PTSD treatment program while earning his GED. He wrote to Bob monthly, stilted letters full of awkward apologies and updates about his therapy progress. Bob had started writing back, sharing stories about Tommy Rodriguez and the kind of man his father had been before the war changed him. "I got another letter from Marcus yesterday," Bob told Sarah, pulling the envelope from his shirt pocket. "He's been accepted into a vocational program, wants to study veterinary science, said he wants to spend the rest of his life helping animals instead of hurting them." "Do you forgive him?" Sarah asked quietly. Bob considered the question, watching Hero demonstrate a training exercise for the puppies. She was teaching them to sit and stay, using patience and gentle persistence rather than force. The contrast with her own brutal conditioning wasn't lost on him. "I forgive the scared kid who grew up without parents and made bad choices," Bob said finally. "I forgive the soldier who came home broken and didn't know how to ask for help. I'm still working on forgiving the man who hurt innocent animals for money." The media attention had eventually faded, replaced by other stories and crises, but the impact lingered. The book deal Sarah had negotiated was funding expansion of Martha's Haven, and the documentary about Hero's recovery had raised awareness about animal cruelty that led to stronger federal legislation. More importantly, Bob had discovered a purpose that made getting up each morning feel like privilege rather than obligation. He'd become an advocate for veteran animals, speaking at conferences and working with legislators to improve retirement care for canine veterans. The work felt like the right kind of legacy, something Martha would have been proud of. "Mrs. Peterson called this morning," Sarah said, interrupting his reverie. "The FBI wants to nominate Hero for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. She'd be the first dog honored there." Bob felt his throat tighten. "She deserves it. They all do. Every dog we've rescued, every animal that didn't make it home." Hero seemed to sense the emotional weight of the conversation. She abandoned her supervision of the puppies and padded over to lean against Bob's legs, offering the kind of wordless comfort that had sustained him through his darkest moments. Dr. Hayes had joined them for Sunday dinner the previous week, and Bob found himself looking forward to her visits in a way that both excited and terrified him. She wasn't Martha, no one could be, but she understood his devotion to broken things and shared his belief that healing was possible for even the most damaged souls. "You know what Martha would say about Dr. Hayes?" Sarah said, as if reading his thoughts. "That I'm too old to be shy about asking a woman to dinner," Bob replied with a rueful smile. "Your mother never was subtle about matchmaking. She'd also say that loving again doesn't diminish what you had before. It honors it." The afternoon brought visitors, a steady stream of people who'd heard about Martha's Haven and wanted to see the famous Hero for themselves. Bob had initially resisted the attention, but he'd learned that sharing Hero's story helped other people understand the resilience of both humans and animals. A group of veterans had driven down from Dallas, some with their own service dogs, others hoping to adopt retired canines when they became available. Hero greeted each visitor with dignity, allowing petting and photographs, but maintaining the professional bearing that had made her legendary. "She knows she's famous," observed one of the veterans, a young woman whose mobility service dog wore ribbons from multiple competitions, "but she's not vain about it. She's still working, just in a different way." That evening, after the visitors had departed and Sarah had taken the boys home, Bob sat on his porch watching the sunset paint the Texas sky in shades of gold and crimson. Hero lay at his feet, content and watchful, while the puppies played in the fading light. 6 months ago, he'd been ready to surrender to bankruptcy, to loneliness, to the slow dissolution of everything he'd built with Martha. Now he was planning new kennels, interviewing applicants for the sanctuary's expansion, and corresponding with animal welfare organizations across the country. "You saved my life," he told Hero, stroking her ears with gentle reverence. "I know everyone thinks I saved yours, but that's not the whole truth. You reminded me that broken things can heal if they're given enough love and time." Hero's tail thumped against the porch boards, and she shifted position to rest her head on Bob's lap. In the distance, the lights of Austin twinkled like earthbound stars, but here on the farm, peace settled over them like a comfortable blanket. The phone rang inside the house, probably another call about the sanctuary, another animal in need of rescue, another opportunity to choose hope over despair. Bob would answer it soon because that was his job now, being the person who didn't turn away when something precious was suffering. But for now, he sat in the gathering darkness with a dog who'd taught him that redemption was possible for anyone brave enough to believe in second chances. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new animals to heal, new reasons to keep fighting the good fight. Tonight, though, was for gratitude and the quiet satisfaction of promises kept, to Martha, to Tommy Rodriguez, and to every broken soul who'd found their way to this small farm where healing happened one heart at a time. In the barn, the other rescued dogs settled in for the night, safe and loved, and finally home. They'd found their way out of darkness just like Hero, just like Bob himself. Sometimes that was enough. At 67, Bob Mitchell thought his story was over. Widowed, broke, facing foreclosure on the farm he'd built with his beloved Martha. Sound familiar? Maybe you felt that emptiness too, wondering if your best years are behind you. But sometimes salvation comes on 4 legs. When Bob pulled a dying German shepherd from that ditch, he wasn't just saving Hero. He was discovering that our greatest chapters can begin when we think the book is closed. Hero had survived the worst humanity could inflict, yet chose love over bitterness. Bob had every reason to give up, yet chose purpose over despair. Together, they proved that broken doesn't mean worthless, that second chances aren't just for the young, and that the love we give to others often heals our own wounded hearts. Today, Martha's Haven shelters dozens of retired service animals. Bob has found new love with Dr. Hayes, and his grandsons play where once only loneliness lived. Your story isn't over either, friend. Sometimes we just need to be brave enough to pull something beautiful from the ditch of our circumstances. What broken thing in your life might actually be your greatest blessing in disguise? Have you ever discovered unexpected purpose when you thought all hope was lost? Share your story below. We need to hear it.